Draisaitl off to McDavid. Back to Draisaitl. One-timer. Score! And Draisaitl stays hot. Down low a dish. Draisaitl tucks it home from Yamamoto. Draisaitl has scored twice. Draisaitl shoots and scores. Hat trick, Leon Draisaitl. The third of his career. In front, reach shot, score. That's 4 for Leon Draisaitl.
This guy's pretty good, this Draisaitl fellow.
And we're going to wonder if that's the night that cemented Leon Draisaitl as MVP, or did he do that a few weeks ago? We welcome you to another edition of Our Line Starts. Liam McHugh, Keith Jones in studio. Eddie Olczyk's going to join us by phone in just a second, which is lucky for him because he doesn't have to sit in these chairs, which I still have not figured out how to sit in.
They're not the most comfortable chairs in the world, but, you know, it is what it is.
Way to tough it out.
Yeah, we'll get through it.
All right, here's what's on tap today. We're going to talk about Leon Draisaitl. Right now running away with the NHL points lead. The question is he running away with the Hart Trophy race? The Pittsburgh Penguins. What exactly is wrong with this team that has lost 6 straight? They've not picked up a single point during that skid. And then, of course, the latest from the NHL General Managers meetings. One potential interesting change, one rule that is not going anywhere I'm happy about. We'll also have a conversation with Blackhawks GM Stan Bowman. He's being interviewed by Pierre Maguire. This took place last week, just after the trade deadline. But now we welcome in the man himself. Edzo, how are you, my friend?
Hey, what's up, Liam? Jonesy, nice to be with you, boys.
It's good to have you, buddy.
Let's just talk about Leon Draisaitl. 4 goals last night, 5-point performance, running away with the points lead right now. He's actually in the Rocket Richard conversation all of a sudden. Clear cut in your mind, Edzo, Draisaitl, the MVP of the season?
Yeah, right now I'd have to say so, Liam. Now, he got a little help there last night from Pecorine. That's a whole nother story with the lack of goaltending that Nashville has gotten all year, and that's why they're a bubble team. But, you know, look, I mean, the guy has been consistent. He was consistent when McDavid was out, and you'll see what he did last night to put up a 4 spot in Nashville and a thumping of the Nashville Predators. So, I mean, look at it. I mean, this guy's a two-way player. He's got incredible hockey sense, and it goes along with that great skill. So, yes, I don't think there's any doubt. And look, I mean, if he leads the league in scoring and he leads the league in goals, it's a no-brainer. But I just think with the way that Edmonton has played, looking like they're going to make the playoffs, certainly that plays into it as well. So, yes, I think he is clear-cut right now, as long as he can, you know, maintain a point a game pace here the rest of the season. Yeah, I think it's his to lose from here on in. Yes.
I agree with you, Ed. So I think he's just had a phenomenal season. I think we saw signs of it happening last year, and I think some of that you put to give credit to Connor McDavid playing with Draisaitl for a lot of last season and a lot of the early going this season. But that's not the case, and I think it became really clear when McDavid was out with injury and Draisaitl took off again. That's the one thing that really allowed me to separate Draisaitl from McDavid and make him the MVP in the National Hockey League this year. Most importantly, Edmonton's playing better. And they not only look like a playoff team, they look like a dangerous team when the playoffs roll around. And so much of it has to do with how much Draisaitl has become a superstar in the game. And like most superstars, he works on his game. He's faster than he was when he entered the National Hockey League. He's better on faceoffs than he was. He's doing all the little things that made Crosby, you know, the best player in the game over the last couple of decades. It's that type of work ethic that I think is going to lead Draisaitl to many more opportunities to win the MVP as well.
Edzo, you agree with that? Do you think this is a dangerous team come playoff time? I know they can do it offensively. That they've shown that all year, and they're showing it right now. Do you think they play the type of style that can be successful in the postseason?
I don't know if look at. I guess if you have the puck all the time, that's the best defense in the world, and you can speak to that as far as your coverage on Sunday Night Football there, Liam. Right? Like, I mean, that's the best defense in the world is when the offense can hold on to the ball and dictate the terms and kill the clock every once in a while. And it's no different in hockey. Like, if you have the puck all the time, that's the best defense in the world. Now, like, I don't think they're a playoff-ready defensive team. But as you guys know, I mean, the rink gets a little smaller come playoff time, and guys are amped up a little bit. You're on your toes. Maybe you're not trying to, play as aggressive, and maybe that ends up being a good thing. Look, Dave Tippett's always been a very good coach in our league for a long, long time, and the goaltending's been relatively consistent all season long. I think they are a playoff-ready team. I don't know if they can get it done defensively when really push comes to shove. And again, matchups become such an important part, and we're going to talk a lot about it, and I know you guys will as well in studio, but just being on site, look at being in Washington tomorrow for Flyers, Rangers, for Flyers and Capitals. I mean, those teams matching up, you look at it and go, man, oh man, this would be a hell of a 7-game series come playoff time because of the goaltending, because of the mobility on the back end, the physical presence in different parts on both teams. And then you got guys that can make plays and put the puck in the back of the net. So for Edmonton, matchups, I think matchups will matter. They always do come playoff time and be interesting. But that's the only question mark I would have, Liam, is can they defend enough? I'm not sold that they can, but maybe they have the puck enough, and maybe that's all you need. And maybe they have the mindset, look, we know we're going to give up 4 or 5, but, we're going to be able to score 6 and 7 with the guys that we have and the depth we have up and down the lineup.
See, I agree with Edzo on all that. The one thing that stands out to me is if I'm an opposition coach and I'm playing the Edmonton Oilers in the first round, I'm working as hard as I possibly can to find solutions to slow down 2 superstar players that aren't playing on the same line right now. I don't think there's a team that you would prepare more for than the Edmonton Oilers because they're unique. And McDavid's a unique talent, an all-world talent. Draisaitl is now proving that he is as well. And then Kenny Holland went and added some pretty good pieces around. I mean, they're not star players, but that's the best that you could do right now based upon where the Edmonton Oilers are. He added some NHL talent to give him some depth around, and Tyler Ennis and Andre Athanasiou. Green, of course, is hurt right now. But the Edmonton Oilers all of a sudden look like a team that could cause you some issues if you had to go out against them in the first round, and you wouldn't be jumping up and down with the fact that you were playing Edmonton.
Those additions are interesting to me as well because I think just from a psychological standpoint, it's good to know that your team is adding someone to the deadline, that they feel like this is a team that can be a force in the playoffs, so we're adding at this point, and we'll see what we can do. But I think we're now, we've seen enough of some of the new players in new places. We're a week out from the trade deadline. As you take it in and you look at what these teams are now after the moves they made, is there a team that stands out to either one of you guys? Jonesy, I'll start with you, who you feel like, wow, they've really set themselves up for the postseason with the moves that they made?
I like some of the subtle moves that the Tampa Bay Lightning made, and I think a lot of them have to do with what happened last year when they were swept in the first round. And as well as they had played over about a 20-game stretch leading up to the All-Star break, they still felt the desire to go out and add a couple of pieces. Barclay Goodrow, I think, is a very good piece, and they paid a high price for him.
First round.
I mean, this is not a player that jumped off the page as a player that you would go out and give a first-round pick for at the trade deadline, but good for San Jose to pick up a first-rounder for him, and also good for Barclay Goodrow to become a valuable piece of the puzzle.
And if you're Tampa Bay right now, you're really worried about that first-round pick?
No, you're not. I mean, it's going to be 28th, 30th. If they play to their expectations, it could be 31st. So I do believe that Tampa, in the addition of Blake Coleman, also a player that provides a different element than what they had in the lineup. So they've been eyeing a return to the playoffs, and this time a long run in the playoffs compared to what happened last year, which was a disaster. So I like what Tampa did.
Edzo?
Yeah, I like the Coleman pickup a lot, Jonesy. I agree with him, Liam. I think Coleman's going to be a sneaky good player because he can really skate. I think he's an underrated penalty killer. I guarantee you, come playoff time, he's gonna get a big goal when his team is shorthanded. He just has that knack. He's one of those guys, Jonesy, where when he's killing penalties, like the puck just finds this guy, and he can. I don't want to say he's got the speed of Michael Grabner, but he thinks the game, so he can be. He looks maybe even quicker than he is, and he's going to score a big goal for him. I agree with Tampa, but I'm going to go to Vegas. I think the addition of Alec Martinez and Robin Leonard, to me, sends a pretty darn strong message inside that locker room. And Liam, you touched on it with Draisaitl and McDavid. The message that Kenny Holland sent, inside that dressing room, Jonesy, that hey, we're adding here. We believe that we can get into the playoffs, and we're going to give you a little bit of help. We're not going to mortgage the future. But I like what Vegas has done here. The goaltending all year pretty much has been average at best in Vegas. And now you got a little bit of competition for Marc-Andre Fleury and Robin Lehner, who I got a chance to see a lot in Chicago this year. And I thought he was all-star worthy, guys. Jonesy, I don't know what you think, but the way that he played, he gave his team, for the most part, a chance to win and won probably 3 or 4 games for the Blackhawks. I like that pickup a lot. I really do. And then Martinez is a proven winner. Couple of cup clinching goal, if I'm not mistaken.
Did, yeah, against the Rangers. Yep.
So, yeah, look at Mark Stone, to me, I know I'm just kind of going off here a little bit, but if anybody watches the game, I would encourage them to watch Mark Stone as often as you can and see the unbelievable little things this guy does. He's not a pretty player by any stretch when you look at him, how fast he is, or maybe how he goes about his craft. And I know he's banged up right now.
Yep.
But this guy, I mean, what I'm going to say might maybe take people by surprise, but I would argue right now that Mark Stone's a top 5 player in the NHL. He is so good with the offensive part of the game, but he is so good without the puck. He steals pucks. He gets back in plays. He plays power play. He plays penalty kill. He makes other players around him better. And I like what Vegas did here. I think the West is absolutely wide open. Roll the octagon down the street and say, yeah, okay, that name pops up at the top, and go, yeah, I can make a case for that team. I think Vegas, when they're there, I think they're as good as St. Louis and Colorado in the Western Conference. And who knows what the matchups are going to be, and we talked about that a little earlier. But I think Vegas, I like what they did. They're aggressive. They're going for it. But I think a guy like Mark Stone, to me, is I think he's still underrated, Jonesy, in the league. I think he's that good. And
I think that's a big statement. I mean, top 5 in the league.
No,
and I get it because he does a lot. But then you really have to look at the next couple of weeks. He has to be healthy for this team.
Top 5 players in the league. I don't know if Mark Stone would be on anybody's list. He'd be on my list for sure. Jonesy, I don't know what you think about Mark Stone.
I love him as a player, and I think Vegas rewarded him with that huge contract when they signed him. So I don't think it was lost on them how important they felt that he would be. So hopefully for Vegas, they tread water without him.
Yep.
I mean, he's an extremely valuable player, and hopefully he's 100% healthy when the playoffs roll around. This time of year, you've got some guys that are going to try to play through things. So they are in a position right now where they can shut him down for a while. But come playoff time, they're going to need him in round number 1. And if you look at the three teams in the Central Division, we're talking trade deadline, the top 3 teams really didn't do a whole lot. St. Louis stood pat and are waiting for Tarasenko to return. So you could count that as an incredibly valuable addition after the trade deadline. Dallas stayed the same. I mean, they made no changes, and I don't blame them. I'm actually very pleased that they did not. They have enough players within that have played extremely well, and they're going to put some fear in teams. Nashville made trades before the deadline rolled around, and the Central Division still, to me, is one of the toughest divisions to try to get
Colorado
out.
added some depth.
Colorado had a little bit of depth, but didn't do a whole lot either. And there was people screaming out that they needed to add a goaltender. They stood, relatively quiet in that regard. Hutchinson did play last night and picked up a win, but those 3 teams all look extremely dangerous, and in the West, it is, as Edzo said, wide open. So good for Vegas to go out and add a couple more pieces.
And back to Stone, week to week, expected to return by the end of the season, maybe a little bit earlier. But, I mean, it would be huge for Vegas. Obviously, if he comes back, he's 100%. If he could get a game or 2 also before the playoffs, that would be massive for them, especially when you know now how important Edzo certainly thinks he is. And obviously, Vegas thinks he's very important. That's why they gave him all that money. So we'll look out for him in that division, which has been so tight throughout. And it seems like if you have a good week or a bad week, you're in first place, or maybe you're out of the playoffs. But they seem to have taken control of it. Obviously, other big topic right now in the NHL is General Managers meetings being held down south. And right at the top of this has become something that has not been at the top of the list simply because of what happened with David Ayres. Here's a guy who's arguably the greatest story the last few weeks of hockey, one of the coolest sports stories of, I would have to say, the last year easily, a emergency backup goaltender who comes to the game. The guy who drives the Zamboni on the practice rink for the Toronto Maple Leafs comes in against this team for Carolina, makes 7 stops in the third period. This after giving up goals on the first 2 shots he faced. Rob Brindamore shaking his head, going, I can't believe this. He's a hero. Carolina wins. Toronto loses. David Ayres goes on a whole tour. He joined us on our coverage. He was on the Today Show. He couldn't have been better. Pure joy, an amazing story. And then what happens right after that? People start to wonder, hey, this was a great story. We really enjoyed this. Maybe the NHL shouldn't do this. Maybe this is just one of those quirky rules that they should get rid of. And now we know they have no appetite at this point to get rid of this.
Good.
And I think that's a good thing. To me, the only thing that sort of reaches out, and I know it's such a long shot from happening, is the simple fact that he is the emergency backup goaltender for the arena. That means for both teams. That means if both teams needs an emergency backup goaltender, one team basically doesn't have one and now has to make do and has to figure something out. Outside of that, I am very happy that they're not changing anything.
And the good side of this is if in fact, let's say Carolina, after the third shot got past them, figured out, man, this guy's not even trying for us. We got a problem here. They do have an option of putting one of their own players in net. They do have options out there. They can remove him from the game if they like, and that's always been in place, or they can play with 6 skaters. So, I mean, it's such a rare occasion that it happens that I'm glad that they're going to continue. These guys come to the rink and they're out there getting ready and preparing and dreaming of an opportunity to jump out there, and it so rarely happens.
I don't even think he was dreaming anymore. He's 42 years old. I'm sure he thought this is never going to happen, Edzo.
Yeah, I mean, look at I saw the Scott Foster game in person when it happened, and Chicago won. Carolina, David Ayres comes in. You guys well documented. He comes in. They win the game. I think it might be a different tone, just my opinion. And look, if I was on one of those teams and a guy comes in and you lose, I'd probably have a different tone, and I'd probably be a sore loser and probably want to change it. I mean, look, full disclosure, but I mean, look, it's only happened a couple of times in how many thousands of games, right? I understand, but maybe you can massage the requirements, right? Maybe there's an age, maybe you can bump up their pay. Maybe the guy has to have played, maybe competitive hockey in the last, I don't know. I'm just throwing stuff out there. You guys can tell me I'm full of it or whatever, but that's all. Look, it is a great story. It got our game out there. I mean, for sure, 100%. I mean, geez, I've been trying to get on the Today Show with my book that's out there, and David Ayres gets on there, and I mean, so I'm a little envious and jealous of that, but seriously, I think I'd like to see him massage it a little bit, but it's great for the game. Great for him. Lived the dream. Carolina won. I'm sure the Maple Leafs are probably still a little sour. And, hey, look, if he would have lost, and I know what ifs are, but if they lost and they miss the playoffs by 1 point or something.
And they're right there, and those points are valuable. And I get it.
$12 million, $10 or $12 million decision.
But they won.
But
they won.
I know that. But let's take it a step further. Why didn't Carolina either sign Ayres to have him play goal now? They haven't won since he played.
A fair question.
Make a trade for a goalie.
Making a trade for a goalie probably would have been the right thing to do, especially now that we know that Robert Leonard was moved.
It's the amazing part of the whole story. The Maple Leafs were embarrassed at home. They lost to the Zamboni driver, and they have done nothing but win since.
Their own crowd gives them a standing ovation.
And now Carolina has lost ever since. And if you watch that game, it was like those two teams were on 2 different planets. And now all of a sudden it's all turned around. Florida can't win a game on the other side. Toronto's in the playoffs.
And they paid a lot for their goalie, Florida.
Exactly. So. Yeah, they did. Probably overpaid if you look at it right now, the way he's performed.
The other big story from the general managers meetings, they voted Tuesday in favor of changing the application of the offside rule to allow for players to be considered onside as long as one of their skates is above the vertical plane of the blue line, regardless if it is in contact with the ice. Edzo, you're on site. You call a bunch of these games, so you deal with this. What do you think of this tweak, potentially?
I like it. I like it a lot. I do. Look at the more more opportunity we have plays to continue, Liam, the better it's going to be for our fans, and it's going to better be for us to be able to talk about goals and not having to call him back because the guy, in the spirit of the rule, is his leg is outside the zone, but it's not touching the ice. I'm okay with it. I mean, I'm good with it. I'm good if they would, have it, like in football, you break the play and it's a touchdown or whatever. You don't have to have control, whatever. I'm good. I'm good with that. I mean, the one thing, and I've suggested this for a long time now, but like now stay with me here. So when you are entering the offensive zone, the puck must be completely over the blue line in order for the play to be onside. Now, when the puck is already in the offensive zone, in order for the play to be offside, the puck has to come completely outside the blue line. So I'm saying is use the whole width of the blue line to make plays onside. So entering the zone, as soon as the puck hits the blue line, the play is onside. You gain 12 inches of play in the offensive zone on the rush. And it hasn't got any traction. I talked to some general managers. Some of them like it. Some of them have to think about it. But again, that's just tweaking for down the road. So all I'm saying is extend the blue line that as soon as it hits it, regardless, it's onside. And I just would like to see some consistency there. I think there'd be more plays that would be easier for the officials to call. But to answer your question, I like the spirit of the rule. If your leg's up and as long as you're onside and it's up in the air, let the play continue.
Well, that's one change that potentially that you'd like to see. I mean, I'm curious. With the idea that you have replay at your disposal, is there something you would change about the replay situation in the NHL? Jonesy?
I like the way it is. I like this change. I think it's an excellent one. I'm a big fan of fans being allowed to celebrate without all of a sudden having to stop and go, oh my God, it's being reviewed and we're going to have this turned back. In a league that we have proven that the quicker the games are played, it seems like people enjoy them more. I think we're way ahead of the curve compared to other leagues. So one less delay, I think, goes a long way as well. I think how quickly our games are ending, I think it's around 2 hours and 30 minutes, somewhere in there. That's faster than it's ever been. And it's a major advantage at a time when Major League Baseball takes forever and no one wants to sit through a game. I think we've got it right. And this is just another way to have the play continue. And secondly, we're promoting offense. Offense has proven to be much more interesting for fans. And this is another way to allow a goal to stand and continue to, force more goals from the opposition who may be trailing at that point.
I like the less is more idea, especially when it comes to scoring plays. What you don't want to see, and we've seen in the NFL, is this sort of reduction in emotion right at the point where you should be celebrating, because immediately in the back of your mind, you're wondering, is that going to count?
Yeah.
You want to see a scoring play and you want to get excited, or if you're rooting for the other team, perhaps angry. But either way, it's an emotional experience and you want to continue.
Hey,
that.
Liam, can I just add something like on that? I'm just, again, I know from my vantage point as a broadcaster, and Jonesy, I know when you're doing games as well, it's like the puck goes in the net and the first thing you're looking at is, okay, was the play onside? Was it touched by you know what I mean? Like the mindset isn't into right away. It isn't, for the most part, it isn't to break down the goal and explain it to everybody and tell people why. Sometimes you're trying to be one step ahead and go, okay, well, was he out of, was the player offside? Was there too many men on the ice? Did the puck hit the netting? All that kind of stuff is played into it. And I think that's where the video replay and all the technology has come into the game. And look, I love it. I think the league has been so proactive over the years of emphasizing more offense, and I think this is one way. So for what it's worth, it gets my stamp of approval. But from a broadcaster's point of view, yeah, you'd like to just worry about breaking down the goal and telling people why, but you also have to worry about, okay, what's taking place in the prior, 25 or 30 seconds to make the play.
I like that. I mean, I think that's why we're paying you. You're looking at both those and you're doing that. But I think as a fan, your immediate response you don't want it to be, oh, well, are they going to take a look at this 19 times?
That's the worst thing.
And I get that. If there was one tweak I'd make to replay, we've talked about it a few times on the air, Jonesy. It's simply for delay of game penalties, because to me, it's one of those that with replay, it's not a subjective call. You just look at it. It either touched the glass, it did not, it deflected and went out. But usually, and Edzo, you're there at games. Jonesy, you do a bunch of games as well. We usually, within a few looks, are able to very clearly determine that. And then you start getting into playoff games where it really matters. And, defensemen are trying to clear that puck and trying to get out of it. I think it's a simple tweak that can make things a lot clearer.
I think it could be done quickly as well. And if there's no definitive, look at it, then you go with the call that's made on the ice. So that would work, because those penalties have proven to be really important ones. I can't tell you how many games we've watched that there's been a goal scored late in the third period that sent a game to overtime, or a game-winning goal scored in a playoff game on those delay-a-game penalties. So that wouldn't be a bad tweak either.
Are you with me, Edzo?
Commissioner Bettman on line 1 for you, Liam.
Thank you. Make it happen. Have his people call my people. I'll have David Ayers' people call yours.
Yeah,
we'll
we're going to get you on
some of those morning shows. Maybe we'll do the late night circuit as well. All right. We're in a good mood, so I'm going to bring us all down because we're going to talk about the Pittsburgh Penguins. Right now, 6-game skid for this team. They've been really miserable over the last couple, because remember when this thing started, and I think 4 games into it, they were still talking like there's nothing wrong, we don't really have a problem. Then they lost 5 in a row and they said, whoa, there's something wrong, we're playing differently, this is not going well. And Sidney Crosby, just 1 point during that 6-game losing streak, and these are all regulation losses for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Chief concern right now, Edzo, for you when it comes to Pittsburgh?
Well, I'll tell you what, I haven't seen a lot of their games the last couple here. I saw them play in Wash there where they had that lead going in the third period. I think it was last Sunday, if I'm not mistaken, or one of those days. And they played a pretty darn good road game, and then they just kind of fell apart in the third period. And I didn't see this coming, to be honest with you. Now, they've been banged up on the back end. I know I saw some stuff that Dumoulin's getting pretty close to coming back, which is going to be obviously a big, big lift for them. I thought it was interesting the moves that Jimmy Rutherford made. I really did. Connor Sherry obviously has a history there. He scored some huge goals for the Penguins. Maybe he had to take Evan Rodriguez, who I think is a legit, fourth line extra guy. And then the Patrick Marleau, I know veteran presence and whatever, but they made a lot of changes. I think the Penguins are better when those third and fourth line guys are, I know they're banged up a little bit. When a guy like Lafferty is playing, or just guys that are role players that play quick, they play fast. The Blugers, all those guys. That's a Mike Sullivan team. So they've made a lot of changes. I get it, but it'd be really interesting to see. Again, I haven't seen the goaltending the last little while. That's interesting. Me and Bush talked about it on the broadcast maybe a couple of weeks ago. I think it was Super Bowl Sunday, actually, and I asked them, between Washington and Pittsburgh, I asked them, I said, who's going to be the starting goaltenders for each team come playoff time? And we both agreed. It's like, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So now I think it's kind of worked out in Washington, where it looks like Holtby, in my opinion, will probably end up being a guy. I don't know if that's the case in Pittsburgh. Jonesy, maybe you got a better feel for it, but, obviously tough times in the Berg right now.
I personally would start Matt Murray, but I do think one thing you touched on there, Edzo, makes a lot of sense. When trade deadlines come, and you've had a team that's really overachieved at times during the season, when Crosby was out of the lineup, when Malkin was out of the lineup, Letang was out of the lineup, you had different players step up and provide the Penguins with some really consistent play, Mike Sullivan's style of play. So now you bring in all these new faces, and some of those guys that were starting to feel like they were pretty important start to feel a little bit less confident in themselves, and it can push them down a little bit. So it's a concern at times in my career. I've witnessed it where players who were doing a really good job were passed over by players that were brought in at the trade deadline, and the team dips for a little while. I think they're going to figure it out. I know that Brian Dumoulin's very close to returning. That will change things on the back end. Marino also has turned into a very good player for him. For the Penguins, apparently he is close to returning as well. So their blue line should be improved quickly. And also losing 5-0 to San Jose at this time of the year really is an eye-opener.
Yeah.
So there's not a Penguin player that's coming away from that game saying we're okay. And sometimes a little bit of fear goes a long way in getting your team back on track. So I would expect them to get better quickly.
Listen, you can't feel good about it. I think the only way you can sort of look at a silver lining is that the timing's not terrible, right? They still have the stretch run to get right. I think this is, maybe an eye-opener, especially that last loss. Health-wise for their stars, Crosby, you mentioned Malkin, you mentioned Letang. Right now, all healthy. And I'd feel a little bit differently about this if Sidney Crosby had been absolutely lighting up these teams and producing, and they were still losing. But to me, if Crosby suddenly is producing a little bit more, they get a few wins here. Or at least they get a point out of one or two of these games. I'd feel differently about this. I feel like Pittsburgh's probably going to get right. The matchup's going to be interesting because it's probably going to be Philadelphia. But if they slip to the wild card, you're talking about potentially Washington or, of course, Boston maybe in the first round, which would be really interesting. Either way, it looks like Pittsburgh is headed back to the playoffs, and it looks like in the West, the Chicago Blackhawks are going to once again miss the playoffs. And last week, Pierre Maguire sat down with Blackhawks GM. This conversation took place just after the trade deadline.
What a pleasure. Stan Bowman, general manager of the Chicago Blackhawks, 3-time Stanley Cup winner, but the Bowman legacy. How many cups is it all together? Don't count your dad's 3 with Chicago.
Okay, well then so I think it would be down to 14 then.
I think he would be right. He would be right. That's good. I was doing that because I wanted your dad to get
trick
mad at you. God, if he's mad at you. Let's talk about being Scotty Bowman's son, first of all. What's that like?
Well, it's all I know. So I get that question a lot, and I didn't know anything differently. So when I grew up, hockey was my life, and it was important to him, obviously, to keep the kids around the game. And I remember back when I was a little kid, I would follow him around, and I loved to just kind of stand in the background and listen when he would talk. We'd talk to you. Remember back in the days before the internet, and he would just make phone calls all the time, and he would call and want to talk about the game or talk about players, and I would just kind of stand over there and just listen. I love to just listen and soak up the information. So I didn't know anything different as a kid, and he's my dad. I see him differently probably than everyone else does, but I think once he stopped coaching, people saw that different side of Scotty that obviously working closely with him. So it's been fun.
You were a high achiever academically. Canisius High School, you go to Notre Dame. When did you decide, maybe I want to go into the hockey business?
The first time I actually talked about it was on my way back to Buffalo. We had gone, it was my freshman year at Notre Dame, and that was the year that the Penguins played the Blackhawks in the Stanley Cup final.
1992.
That's right. So I finished my first year, and I was the only one of the siblings that actually got to go to the final. I was there when won the cup, and so we were driving back. My mom and I were driving back, and we were talking about my first year at Notre Dame and how it went and what I was interested in. And I said, someday it would be really neat to work in hockey, and I'd love to work with Dad. And so she questioned me. She said, I didn't even know you wanted to do that. You never talked about being a coach. And I said, I don't think I want to be a coach, though. It's not really my thing. I don't have that skill set or that personality to be a coach. But I said, I think down the road someday I'd like to find my way to hockey. So nothing really happened after that. I went along, finished school, got a job in Chicago, working in the business world. And then 4 or 5 years into it, I liked what I was doing. It was fun at the time. I was doing consulting, computer consulting, but I wasn't really passionate about it. I wanted to try something different, and I just applied to a bunch of teams. And actually, the Blackhawks were one of the ones that responded. Mike Smith was the general manager and brought me in, and kind of the rest is history.
You were there from the beginning. You were there in 2002 when Duncan Keith got drafted. You were there in 2003 when Seabrook and Corey Crawford got drafted. 2005, Nicholas Hjalmarsson. 2006, you look at Jonathan Taves, 3rd overall. Then 2007 is a monster load. You get Patrick Kane. You were there right from the beginning. When did you know the plan was going to work?
Well, there were some tough years there in the beginning. If you go back and look from 2000 to 2005, 6, 7, pretty lean years there. So, you're always hopeful. I think there was a lot of promise. We had a lot of these young players who we were high on. I think most teams are pretty high on their young players. I think that's across the board. You get excited about when you have a lot of draft picks and you think they're going to turn out. Obviously, everything changed when Taves and Kane came together. Obviously, we drafted Jonathan the 1 year. He went back to school for a year. Then we drafted Patrick, and then they came onto the scene together. Our team had started to improve the year before with Seabrook and Keith there, but it was still a team that was struggling. And that first year for Jonathan and Patrick, we didn't make the playoffs, but we were in it right until about the end of March. And that was much different than the previous years where we were really not competitive. And then the next year is when we took a big step forward. And at that point, we not only made the playoffs, we went to the semifinal. And then the third year for Patrick and Jonathan is when we won the Cup. So I think you saw signs of it their rookie year. The two guys came in together, and they were, we had this plan, I remember, in the summer where Johnny was going to be our third line center. We were going to work him in slowly, not put too much of a load on him. And, a month or two into the season, he's playing close to our top line. And Patrick was Rookie of the Month in October. Right out of the gate, there was a question, is he going to go to London? Is he going to stay for 10 games? And not only did he stay for the 10 games, he was Rookie of the Month, and it just kind of went from there.
Do you remember, everybody's got a Stanley Cup moment, the first time you win it. I remember the first time I was fortunate enough to win it. Mm-hmm. What was yours?
Well, it's the famous goal now, the goal that nobody knew if it went in. So we're in Philadelphia.
Patrick Kane in Philadelphia, yeah.
The overtime game, and there's so much tension at time. It's Game 6, and we've been in a tough series. We had played really well at home. We hadn't played very well in Philadelphia. But if you're thinking in your head, if this goes back to Chicago, it's one game. Anything can happen in one game. So it gets to overtime. There's obviously a lot of tension in overtime because one shot could be the difference. And then you see Patrick shoot it, and he goes around and he's throwing his gloves. And we're looking at each other like. And I remember thinking to myself, the goal scorers, they don't make that mistake. I mean, there's no way that he would react that way. Mm-hmm. But that was the weird part about it. You don't really know. So there was this big delay, and then finally, they tell you it's a goal, and then there's the rush to get to the elevator to get down to the ice, and it was a moment you won't ever forget.
You touched the cup before because your father had won it so many times. I got to believe you've touched it before?
Yes.
Before 2010?
I had.
So when you touch it, it's one thing. When you lift it over your head, it's another.
It is.
Do you remember that?
I do, yeah. I mean, I remember it like it happened yesterday.
Right.
And because it's something you play over in your mind from the time you're little, is wondering what it would be like. First, when you're little, you think you're going to raise it as a player, and then time goes on, you realize you're not a good enough player to ever play professionally, and you still think maybe I can find a way to raise the cup a different way. So it was, I remember it just like it happened last night.
Did your dad ever give you any advice during the final, that first year in particular, because it was a tight series with Philadelphia that you're talking about? And I know how good he is in those situations. Did he ever say anything to you?
Well, most of the advice he gave was more tactical at that point. He was still dialed in, trying to help us find a way to beat the Flyers. And I think, Pronger was such a force back then. And I think, Byfuglien really made a big difference in that series. And I remember my dad and Joel had spoken, and just, they made a few changes here and there. And it was that's the kind of advice. He didn't really give any advice about what it's like to win the cup or any of that stuff. It was more in the moment, talking about the actual next game, or he likes to break down the details as a coach, so it was more tactical advice.
How hard was it to break up that team after you won the first time? Because you're just a new general manager.
Right.
That's got to be a different load to handle. How was that?
Well, it was very hard. When we sat down that summer, so we knew in August, as we were looking ahead to the season, we knew that we were going to have to move a ton of guys, the way the salary cap was, and we had all these players who were about to get new contracts. So we would have had done the same moves even if we missed the playoffs. And I remember I had hired Kevin Cheveldayoff as my assistant, and so we interviewed him, and he started in early August. And I remember his first day, he came in and we talked about the team, and he had looked at our team from a distance before his interview. But then we sat down and I went through it. I said, okay, well, now that you're here, here's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to shed all these players. And he looks at me like, wow, really? We're going to have to do that? I said, we're going to have to do that whether we win 2 games this year or we win the cup. We have to do it because that's the way the system. We had a luxury. We had all these really talented young players that were not making any money, but they were about to graduate to their next contract. We had a bunch of them at the same time. So there was no way we were going to make the math work. So I guess to me it was almost fitting that we did have to dismantle it, but at least we did that having won a championship together. And that's something that you never forget because you walk together with that group forever. I remember those guys, and it was certainly a challenge because we win the cup, and you only have a week or two before the draft where you have to call every GM, and basically it's sort of an auction. You're saying, well, here's the 5 or 6 guys that we're going to have to move them, and you're trying to play it cool, saying like, oh, we don't have to move these guys, but we might be. And I knew in my mind, we're not going to be able to trade anybody because everyone knows that you're in a tough spot, and so you're trying to pass it off as if you'll see what you do. But we knew we had 5 or 6 guys we had to move. So at the moment we had our celebration. You have the parade, and then the next day it's back in the office, and you're trying to get that done before the draft.
That's one kind of pressure.
Right.
This is another kind of pressure. Your team made the playoffs against St. Louis right in this building. You lose a Game 7. Next year you play Nashville. You get swept in 4. You haven't been in the playoffs since. So it's a different kind of pressure now.
Sure.
How are you retooling the Chicago Blackhawk team to get to where I know the organization wants to be?
Right. We know what it's like to be on top. Certainly we had a great run, and I think we want to get back there. And it almost makes it harder when you have success and then you don't have it because you know what it feels like to be a really top team. And we got to get ourselves back to that point. So I wish there was a quick plan to do it, but I think what you have to do is you have to build through young players. I think this is a league that's getting younger and younger. How do you do that? How do you acquire young talent? Nobody hands it to you. You can't just go to the store and pick up some really good 18 or 19-year-old kids. You got to find those assets. So can you trade for them? Can you acquire them through the draft? Can you find free agents? There has to be a measure of patience, which I know doesn't go over really well in our society today. Everyone wants it right now. We still have some talented veteran players who have been there when we won. They know what it takes to win, so they have good leadership qualities. They have good experience on winning. And then we have some talented young players. We need to try to get some more of those so that we can support the rest of the group. And I think for a long time we had a ton of talent relative to some of our competitors. Now that we've seen the cap system play out over a 10-plus year stretch of time, I think you see the talent is kind of distributed now across the league. So we don't have that advantage that we used to have, and now you have to find ways to get players, and I think that's the biggest challenge we have right now, which is finding those high-value players that, we got one last year in the draft. We got a great fortune. We were 12th, and we won the lottery to move up to 3.
Doc's a good player.
Kirby's a very nice player. We wouldn't have got him at the 12th spot.
No way.
So you have to have some luck as well. The year before that, we picked Adam Boquist. We hadn't picked in the top 10 in, 10 years, and so we have 2 good young players, but you need more than 2 players for a team. We've got some veteran guys as well that are still, Patrick's on pace for almost another 100-point season, which is hard to believe.
Amazing.
Yeah, he just he's having his best years in his 30s, which is, we'll take it. It's unusual in any sport to see a guy continue to ramp up his game. And Jonathan had a bounce-back year last year as well. So those 2 guys, although they're in their 30s now, they're still capable of giving us really good hockey. We've just got to try to support around them, and I think that's been the challenge the last couple of years.
Speaking of challenges, you've had some health challenges. You're a cancer survivor. You fought through it. You beat it not just once, but twice.
That's right.
What's the key to doing that?
I think if you break it up into smaller chunks, you can get through it. And what I mean is when I was first diagnosed, I was in my early 30s. You find out you have Hodgkin's lymphoma, and you're scared. You don't know what to make of it. And I remember everyone telling me at the time, "Oh, well, that's the good cancer. That's the one that's really high cure rate. No problem. Don't worry about it. You do your treatment, and you'll be fine." So I did. I did the 6 months of chemo and got the clean bill of health, and then about 3 or 4 months later, it came back right away. And then you start talking to the doctor, and they're like, "Well, this isn't ideal. This isn't supposed to happen. And when it happens that quickly, you have to step up the treatment. You have to have a transplant. So then you're in the hospital for about a month, and they really kind of attack your body, and it's a tough process to go through. So you start to wonder, how do I do it? How am I going to get myself through this again? And the best advice someone gave me was, you just got to focus on today. Yeah, you've got a long road ahead of you, and you've got a lot of procedures you're going to go through. You've got a lot of treatment you're going to have to go through. If you try to manage that all in your mind today, you're never going to get through your treatment today. So just stay in the moment. Don't get ahead of yourself. And it's like the old thing: you take one step at a time. And fortunate for me, it's been great ever since. And you go through those struggles, and I had a young family at the time. They're little kids, and they don't know what's going on. Their dad's not around, and everyone's going to the hospital to visit them. So it's now I talk to my son now. He's 14. He doesn't even remember when he was like 2 years old.
Cameron.
Yeah, Cam. He doesn't even really remember that time. Will's a little bit older, so he remembers what it was like with and there's a lot of emotion at that time. People are coming and crying, and these kids are just watching and not understanding what's happening, but they see their parents aren't doing so well, so they get worried.
So Will's at Deerfield.
He is.
And that's the first time your children or one of your child had left the house. What's that like as a father to have your son away playing hockey, not in Chicago, but somewhere else?
It's been hard. You get so used to when they're little kids in youth hockey. Even though I travel a lot, I still get to see
go to
them.
games. I've seen you at games.
I see them as many games as I could go to. It's been a challenge this year. You don't get to be there. And I think, when they get to be teenagers and, he's 17 now, you have to kind of let them go a little bit. And you have to give them a chance to spread their wings and take ownership of their life. And, the distance, I think, is probably good for them to become independent. And he's always been a very independent kid, mature kid. So I wasn't worried about him being able to handle being away from home. It's probably harder on the mom and dad not seeing him all the time, because he's always, like, I travel a lot. Obviously with this job, you're not home very much to help out your wife and kids. And so he kind of took on that role as the one to be the right-hand man for my wife, Sue. And I think it was hard originally, but now we're happy for him. He's loving life. He's meet a whole new group of friends, a different experience being on your own, and still enjoying playing hockey.
So the trade deadline, let's get to the trade deadline. Just passed, you moved Robin Lehner. First of all, you deserve a lot of plaudits for bringing Robin Lehner in. Sure. And now you moved them along. Could you take us through the mindset of why that happened?
Yeah, well, we brought in Robin last summer, and we were excited to get him to come. At first we weren't sure he was going to want to come on a one-year deal. But I think he wanted to try to prove that what he did in New York last year wasn't an aberration, that he could build on it, and he was dynamite for us all year long. I think we had two really good goalies. So if you rewind a little bit, the two previous years, we had good starts, and then Corey got hurt both times, and it really set us back, and ultimately it hurt us having a chance to be a competitive team in the end. So we wanted to try to mitigate that. Fortunately, Corey's been healthy all year, which has been great, and they've been a great tandem. But the hard part of my job is that I'm always balancing the present day with the future. And when you have a player, Robin was one of them, Eric Gustafsson was the other one. When you have players who their contracts are expiring, they're unrestricted free agents, if you don't have them under contract and you're not going to be signing them, or it appears like you might not be signing them, then you have to weigh that one window of time when you can still get value for them. And ultimately, that's why we did it. It's a hard decision to make, and I got a chance to get to know Robin last summer during the process when we were courting him, I guess you could call it. Other teams were talking to him, and he was a really fascinating guy. I'm really been impressed with what kind of person he is, and really thoughtful. He's got a great perspective on things and really intelligent. So that makes the decision even harder. And certainly no animosity or hard feelings at all. It was more of just a managing our assets type decision. But I talked to him yesterday, and we had a good talk, and I wish him well. I mean, he's one of the guys you root for. He's a tremendous goalie, first and foremost, but above that, he's a unique guy, and I got to know him, and we're going to miss him.
We're right at the end here, so I'm going to say a player's name. First thing that comes to your mind: Patrick Kane.
Skill.
Jonathan Toews.
Determined.
So far, Marian Hossa.
Complete.
Bobby Orr.
The best.
He's right. You got it right, Stan. That was awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
By the way, named after the Stanley Cup, Stanley Bowman.
That's right.
Okay, I did say the Chicago Blackhawks are probably going to miss the postseason, and I do believe that they are not completely out of it. You look at the standings in the Western Conference, and this wild card race is interesting. It's tightly bunched right now. Chicago, Edzo's on the way to the game against the Ducks tonight. If they win tonight, they're potentially 4 points out. But Nashville is playing Minnesota tonight. Someone's picking up points there, potentially both teams if it goes to overtime. Minnesota just won't go away. Arizona is hanging around. They have 72 points. Winnipeg has 72 points. Even points-wise with Nashville, and then in that top wild card, it's Vancouver, tightly bunched with the Pacific Division. So you look at this Western wild card race as it stands right now. Is there a team that you would consider a bubble team that you feel confident in saying they are going to get in, Jonesy?
I don't feel confident in any of them. I think they all have weaknesses. And watching Nashville last night against Edmonton, I was hoping in the third period, when it was 3-3, that Nashville was starting to figure things out. But their goaltending, as Edzo talked about earlier, was atrocious. And that's something that Nashville's going to need if they're going to hang in there and continue to fight for the playoffs. I think they would be a dangerous playoff team if they make it, but there's no guarantee there. Arizona, with Darcy Kemper back in the mix now, I think improves their chances. Games in hand are not a benefit for them. They're giving up games to every team that's around them. But they have enough there, and I think they're defensively good enough that they could make some noise. If I had to pick one team that's not in right now that I think could get there, it would be Arizona. But it's a long stretch, and it's hard to find any real confidence in any of the 5 or 6 teams that we're looking there right now.
Edzo, confident in any of these teams?
Wow. Look, I don't know where
that pause says a lot.
Yeah, I don't know where. I don't know where Jacob Markstrom is, the goaltender for the Vancouver Canucks. He's banged up. But I would look at Vancouver as the one wild card team right now. And again, they're only 1 point behind Calgary. I think 4 going into tonight's action with Edmonton. I look at Vancouver and I think that they would. To me, I'd be shocked if Vancouver doesn't make it with the other teams that are behind them, right? They all got blemishes. They all got holes. Nashville, Winnipeg, Arizona, Minnesota, Chicago. San Jose's not making it. So, there you are, right? One of those teams is going to make it. So I think Vancouver is in. I don't know what Jonesy thinks, but when you look at between Nashville, Winnipeg, Arizona, Minnesota, Chicago, you got to look at, which team is going to get the goaltending that you have the confidence in to get the goaltending. So that would be, for me, automatically it would be Winnipeg, Arizona, and Chicago, just with the way that the season has gone from start to now. And then you look at, which team can play defense enough, and then which team can go ahead and have the ability to put the puck in the back of the net. I'm worried about Nashville. I saw Nashville earlier in the year, and I thought, man, oh man, these guys got a chance at winning the division. That's how good they were. And they've not gotten a goaltending, as we touched on earlier. Jonesy just made reference of. So for me, Vancouver's in, and then go ahead and roll the dice and go, yeah, I can see them. I can see them. Yes, I can see them. Yes, I can see them. It's wide open. Well, but I'd go Vancouver, Liam.
Let me flip it around. So let's just say Vancouver gets in, and I think it's either Vancouver or Calgary for that top wild card spot, and then the other team is the third position in the Pacific. Right now, Vancouver actually has games in hand on Calgary. So let's just say both those teams get in. One's the 3 in the Pacific, the other is the top wild card. And let's say St. Louis, it could be Colorado easily, but let's say St. Louis is the top seed in the West. And you look at these other teams, you look at Nashville, Winnipeg, Arizona, Minnesota. If you are St. Louis, which one of those teams do you not want to face in the first round?
It's Nashville, because they've beat St. Louis all 4 times this year. There's no question that Nashville matches up well against the Blues. Now, when there's a lot more on the line, and we're talking playoffs, you have to give an advantage to St. Louis based upon what they did last year. But they would not be jumping up and down to play the Nashville Predators, and part of that would be that Nashville has a lot of depth, and they also have a superstar defenseman in Roman Josi on the back end that now has some company with Ryan Ellis back in the lineup. So I don't think St. Louis would be wanting to
tough
play
place
Nashville.
to play road games in the playoffs
It can
as well.
really get going in there as well, and they can get pretty charged up. And it looks to me at times Nashville doesn't mind playing a physical game. I think we saw that in Hockey Day in America where they went at it, head toe-to-toe. But in that game, Nashville got goaltending. That has not been the story all year for
Tough
Nashville.
team to figure out, but Edzo, would you agree? Would you say that that's the team St. Louis wouldn't want to play?
Yeah, I would concur. I mean, I would even throw Winnipeg into their Jonesy, like maybe a 1A next to Nashville, from the aspect of they got Connor Hellebuck, who is a pretty damn good goaltender. I know their defense has been dismantled since the beginning of the year with free agency and trades and Big Buff stepping away, but they got some guys up front that can really go. They got some physical players there up front. I think that would be one hell of a series. I really do. I mean, remember last year, St. Louis beat Winnipeg, but St. Louis won the first 2 games in Winnipeg, if I'm not mistaken, and then Winnipeg went to St. Louis and won the next 2 games, right? And the series was 2-2 with the best of 3, and eventually St. Louis won. So Winnipeg's an interesting team to me. I mean, just their defense, right? Like, that's the biggest question mark. But again, I go back to it. What teams don't have blemishes that are going to be that second wild card team, right? You can poke a hole in every single team. So I would agree with Jonesy, though. Nashville would certainly be one, but I would put Winnipeg in there as a 1A.
Edzo, great stuff as always. Have an excellent call tonight. We're going to clip your best moments from this. We're going to send it right over to the Today Show, folks. Jimmy Fallon. Jonesy's going to make this happen. He's going to book you on some big shows.
He'll be there, buddy. He'll be there.
Yep, from Our Line Starts to the bright lights of Broadway. Edzo, you'll be there, buddy.
I'll make sure I bring my A suit if it happens. Thanks, boys. Keep up the great work, all right? We'll see you soon. See
all
ya.
right, that'll do it for another episode of Our Line Starts. You can remember, new episodes drop every Wednesday. Subscribe for automatic downloads wherever you get your podcasts. We will see you next time.